Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to experience both the highs and the lows of adventure with a returning guest to the show. Adam Herzog from Asheville, North Carolina is back with us today. And you might remember him from episode 35 when he shared his experiences and the flow states that accompanied them during his lifetime of kayaking Class 5 whitewater. It was one of my favorite episodes, packed full of wisdom and going with the flow. If you haven't heard the first part of Adam's story as an elite whitewater kayaker, I highly recommend episode 35. That conversation was a little over a year ago. And since then, Adam has experienced the extreme highs and lows of adventurous risk-taking. After successfully achieving a lifetime goal to navigate the Grand Canyon of kayaking last year, Adam returned to his home in Asheville and shortly thereafter suffered an injury after falling 45 feet from an indoor climbing wall. This is a story about learning from our mistakes and the power of resilience. And I'm so excited to have Adam back here to share his story with us. Adam, welcome back to the campfire.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so great to be back here with you, and kind of a fun thing. I happened to be in Asheville a couple of weeks ago, so got to hang out with you face to face, which was super cool.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah. So, I'm assuming that some people might be listening to this and have not heard episode 35. And as I said in the intro, I highly recommend going back and listening to it. But I just kind of want to recap a little bit of your journey up to episode 35. And so, if you don't mind, just a kind of a background of who you are and your sort of journey of whitewater kayaking.
I'm Adam Herzog. I live in Asheville, as you said, and I've been whitewater kayaking since I was 12 years old. Grew up in Western North Carolina, spent most of my life here. Whitewater kayaking has really been the kind of driving force of my life, and I've focused primarily for the last probably 25 years on difficult and dangerous whitewater, Class 5 whitewater, which consists of, paddling off big waterfalls and through difficult rapids. It's a journey that's taken me to some pretty cool places, and yeah, really, it's what I'm all about.
Yes, and also you are professionally a trauma nurse and an EMT.
Yeah, I've been a paramedic for 22 years. I nursed for about 15 years. I worked for the trauma department at Mission Hospital in Asheville as a trauma nurse lead on a specialized team of highly trained nurses that all we do is trauma care. So we provide the resuscitation and initial assessment for the acute trauma patient when they roll in the ER doors, and then ongoing care throughout the hospitalization.
Yeah. So in prep for our conversation today, I actually went back and re-listened to episode 35 again myself. It was so good. I mean, it was just packed full. The title of it was Going with the Flow on Class 5 Whitewater. And we really got into a lot of the metaphor of paddling whitewater and sort of that feeling of just kind of getting into a flow state and just, really losing yourself and just kind of finding yourself in that flow of water. And there really was just so much wisdom, not just about whitewater kayaking, but also just some metaphors of life as well. And man, I just, that experience of flow state, and maybe we'll touch on it again a little bit more, but so since that episode, you've had some big things. And when we spoke, you were getting ready to go to the Stikine. Did I pronounce that right?
Stikine. Yep.
The Stikine. So can tell us a little bit about that journey that you were preparing for, and tell us about the Grand Canyon of kayaking.
I would say it's probably more like the Mount Everest of kayaking.
The Mount Everest of kayaking, even better.
So the Stikine River is in northwestern British Columbia. and it's way out at the end of the road. It's about 1,000 miles north of Vancouver, and it's widely regarded within the elite paddling circles as kind of the crown jewel of expedition kayaking. Essentially, you're backpacking out of your kayak, so you're shoving food and camping gear for several days in the back of the boat, which makes the boat obviously super heavy. And then paddling a long stretch of river, camping out of the boat as you go along. And the Stikine is, there's a 6-class scale for whitewater. Class 1 is just moving water, and class 6 is the upper limit or beyond the upper limit of navigability. And the Stikine is class 5 and 5+ whitewater for about 60 miles. It's in a 1,000-foot deep slot canyon, so the walls in many places drop straight down to the river. So there's a lot of spots where it's difficult or impossible to get out of the boat. So once you commit to it, the only way out is downstream. I first heard about it when I was probably 13 years old, and I read about it there was a Patagonia catalog with an essay called Drowning, and it was written by Bob McDougall, who was a well-regarded expedition kayaker back in the 90s. And he was ripped out of his boat in the first rapid and had to free solo up like a 300-foot, vertical wall, crumbling cliff. He survived. I think he quit paddling after that. And ever since I was 13, I've been thinking about it.
Yeah. So what's that like this was a lifelong goal for you that you've been training for. And again, like, to go back to episode 35, like, so much of that episode was about how you really developed the fundamentals, and how, like, you grew in your skill level to a place to where, like, class 5 was just like naturally within your comfort zone, something that's just like so unbelievable to other people, but your ability to just get into class 5 and just do it. But what was that like to be able to accomplish that lifetime goal of the Stikine?
I mean, it was overwhelming. When we got to the takeout, I was certainly choking back tears. It had just been such a long time coming. And so I spent, really 5 years preparing for it. And the preparation included, everything from breath work and, breath hold training, so I could hold my breath for over 3 minutes when I went up there, to weightlifting and kind of traditional fitness. Obviously, tons of kayaking. I was paddling, a couple hundred days a year, as much as I could on class 5. So it was kind of a multi-year project to really pull it off. And I, planned the trip several times. It's kind of like mountaineering in that you need the conditions to line up, and the conditions mean, the correct water level, the right crew. You got to have the time to do it. And there's a lot of variability in those conditions. So I probably planned the trip fairly extensively 3 times before we finally pulled the trigger and went up there in 2022.
Yeah. And so I just want to repeat, because this is kind of blow your mind, like class 5 whitewater for 60 miles.
Yep. It's big water. So it's about 10 to 15,000 cubic feet per second, which just means, you're standing at one point and X number of cubic feet pass by you in a given second. Just for like your Charlotte listeners, for something in comparison, I think the Whitewater Center probably has, less than 1,000 cubic feet per second in both channels combined. So that kind of gives you some perspective. And then the canyon walls are really tight and narrow, so the water gets kind of squeezed in between these canyon walls. It has almost like a fire hose effect. So the velocity of the whitewater is quite intense. It kicks up, 10 to 15 foot waves and giant holes. And yeah, it's rowdy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, man, how long did it take to complete the entire 60 miles?
We were in BC for 2 weeks. I went there with a good friend. We needed a crew to link up with, and we were able to do that early in our trip. So we paddled in southern British Columbia and interior British Columbia for, 8 or 9 days, kind of getting used to the type of whitewater, the environment, and the group. And then 6 of us went up to the Stikine, and we paddled it over just 2 days. We had a couple guys who had done it before, which made it go a little quicker for sure.
Yeah. So 60 miles over 2 days through class.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to have just been an intense 2 days.
It was an intense couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this to me, it feels like a stupid question. It's probably not to you, but like class 5 Whitewater 60, I mean, at some point you had to get out, right? To camp, like you're overnight there. Like
Yeah,
what?
there's some spots, a couple places where the riverbed opens up and the canyon walls recede briefly. So there's traditionally two camp spots in the gorge. There's not much flat ground, but there's
Yeah.
two kind of established spots. People go up there almost every year. It sees a few runs, and we did traditionally it was done in 3 days, and then progression of the sport just kind of it's more realistic to do it in 2 days now than it was 30 years ago.
Yeah. So when I was with you in Asheville, you showed me a picture of you in the Stikine, and I mean, it's epic. We'll put the picture up in the show notes for listeners to see her. First of all, congratulations. I mean, this is a lifetime goal. You've really been training for it your whole life, and I feel like in episode 35, you made a statement that you exist to paddle whitewater, and it's been your lifetime goal and passion. And so, to have a culmination of being able to do this 60-mile journey in class 5 on the Stikine, it's pretty amazing. But the title of today's podcast is The Highs and the Lows. And so since we spoke to you a year ago, you've had a couple of big things, the Stikine being a major lifetime high. But then when you got back, something on the low side happened. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, on December 14th, 22, I was climbing at the gym on an auto belay device. And if anyone's not familiar, auto belay is just a machine that allows you to climb without a belayer. So you have a rope that's tethered from the ceiling to the floor, clip it to your climbing harness, you climb up the wall, you let go, and you're just gently lowered to the ground. And hard to believe, but I had just like basically the brain fart from hell and didn't clip in at all without realizing it, and stepped over the rope and climbed up about 45 feet and let go. And I fell, to the ground.
Yeah, man. I remember speaking to you, I think in January, like not too long after it had happened. And yeah, I mean, first of all, this like happy to be on this call with you
Oh,
talking
for
right now.
sure. Yeah, I feel very fortunate to be
Yeah.
alive.
So can you talk about some of the injuries that you suffered? Because pretty miraculous that we are sitting here talking right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had about 15 broken bones total. I fractured my skull, broke my back in a bunch of places. See, I had pulmonary contusions, which is bruising in the lungs. It's pretty severe. Broke all 4 extremities, so left wrist, right elbow, proximal radius, left fibula, and I obliterated my right ankle. And then I had a really bad concussion.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. So, Adam, as a trauma nurse and as a paramedic, you're on the other side of it as a patient. What was the initial hospitalization like? Just in terms of, I guess that those immediate first couple of days,
Yeah,
and also, have you being on the other side of what you do for a living.
it was surreal. I don't remember falling, and I don't remember, my EMS transport or my initial emergency room visit. The team that I work on was waiting for me. I think it was really, traumatic for them as well. But they put me on a ventilator right away for pain management and just to, facilitate CAT scans and imaging. I was really confused, so it would have been very difficult to get me to hold still. So they put me down, put me on a ventilator, and I spent, I guess, about 24 hours on the ventilator, had a couple surgeries. I really don't remember any of that. I just woke up with the endotracheal tube down my throat as they were trying to, get me out of the sedation. So I remember, it's kind of the first thing I remember was waking up intubated, and it was really horrific. It's always been a nightmare for any healthcare provider, I think, to be on the other side. And after that, kind of, my memory slowly becomes more clear and lucid. And the next thing I remember was kind of waking up surrounded by a room full of people who I work with, which was, again, kind of a nightmare. Essentially naked in a bed, not sure how I got there or what had happened. It was very confusing. It took a long time for the concussion to clear. So I was, for the first couple of days, there was just a lot of, I think, repetitive questions and confusion about what exactly had happened.
What was that like when you first sort of came to? Like, what was that like?
It was just, I don't know. It was just horrific, really. It's like, how did I get here? What happened? I couldn't really get my head around when they were explaining to me what had happened. It just didn't seem possible that I would have made such a stupid mistake. So I was feeling really mortified as well by the fact that I had made such a silly error. I've always been like pretty hard on my peers in terms of decision making and using good judgment, and so it was kind of the tables had turned, and I was the one making the bad decision. And so that was a whole nother kind of humbling concept.
Yeah, and I just have to tell you, like your humility and just in sharing your story is really like, first of all, I just really appreciate it, but it's just really inspiring because there's a lesson to be learned here, and you've written some really beautiful stuff to help other people kind of avoid this similar thing from happening. And we're going to get into some of that because I really appreciate some of that wisdom. Can you kind of talk us through maybe the next couple of weeks of recovery and what that was like for you?
Yeah, I spent really only about 24, 36 hours in the intensive care unit. They were able to get me off the ventilator pretty quickly. I really didn't, other than the brain injury and the pulmonary contusions, I didn't have internal organ damage that required surgery. And so really, I just had a bunch of broken bones. And, I got shipped down to the regular orthopedic floor to wait for some of the swelling to go down so they could do some more surgeries. And the first, I don't know, probably 5 to 7 days was really just laying in bed in a whole lot of pain. The pain was, I've had, multiple isolated orthopedic injuries before, but this was just so far beyond anything I had experienced, a completely recalibrated pain for me. So there was a lot of just, boredom, sitting around in pain, waiting. Luckily, I had a huge support network between the kayaking community, my family, and the healthcare community. I had lots of visitors bringing me food and providing what support they could to my family. It was really special. But basically, yeah, I just sat around waiting for, the inflammatory stuff to die down, and then eventually started doing some very light PT, which initially consisted of just moving from the bed to a recliner and sitting in the recliner as long as I could. And eventually, started standing up.
Yeah. I'm curious, like in those first couple of weeks, like what you were being told in terms of like what recovery was going to look like.
Yeah, well, the first thing I was told was that I was going to go sit in a nursing home for 3 months because typically PT and OT can't, if you've got 4 non-weight bearing extremities, there's not a whole lot they can do with you. Mm-hmm. So they can do some range of motion stuff, but if you can't bear weight, you can't really do PT. You can't do real PT. And so the general plan or prognosis would be go to a nursing home for 3 months and lay in bed and wait for the bones to heal. And then when the bones heal, go to a inpatient physical therapy hospital and start doing PT inpatient for anywhere from, a couple weeks to a couple months. So I was looking at, anywhere from 4 to 6 months of not being home. And that was what I was told to expect.
Wow. I'm also curious. I don't know if you've ever heard, and I don't know if I'm going to get them right, but the 5 stages of loss or the 5 stages of grief, where you
Mhm.
go through, like, I think it's denial. I may get the order wrong, but denial, anger, bargaining, disappointment, and acceptance. I
Mhm.
think I might have got those out of order, but I
I
know
think you got it right. Yeah.
denial comes first. I'm curious, like, if you have found yourself going through those phases.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone, you can't put people in a box. So I don't think that everyone grieves in a prescribed way like that. But yeah, I think there's been a little bit of all of those elements. I mean, I was certainly angry with myself, the denial thing. I think probably initially I just could not believe that had actually happened. So there's probably some of that. Yeah, being, when I came home, I was in my basement for, I don't know, 6 weeks. I couldn't go upstairs. I was in a wheelchair. So yeah, that was pretty depressing.
Yeah.
So I've experienced a little bit of all those things, I guess.
Yeah. Man, it's hard, but Adam is a fighter, and one thing that I thought was really interesting. You and I were chatting in Asheville, and you shared with me, because obviously you were training for the Stikine your whole life, but you really were really dialed in for 5 years. You talked about doing breath work training. You talked about, like, this fitness, like this level of fitness. When this accident happened, you were in really good shape.
I was. Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about was how your condition at the time, and I guess maybe you hadn't thought about it for a little while, but really, impacted your ability to sustain this injury and survive. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Everybody was telling me that when I was convalescing, oh yeah, you'd be, anybody else would be dead, or there's no way you would be in such, be recovering so quickly if you weren't in such good shape initially. And it sounded good, but I didn't have anything concrete to kind of back that up. And then I talked to one of the ICU doctors, and he took care of me while I was in the hospital. And he was saying he had been very concerned about my pulmonary contusions. As I said, they're bruising in the lungs, but in and of themselves, they'll heal. But for a lot of folks, they lead to ARDS, which is adult respiratory distress syndrome. It's kind of like a really severe type of pneumonia where your alveoli collapse and you have severe atelectasis. And a lot of people die from it. It can turn into sepsis and multi-organ dysfunction and lead to death. There's a pretty clear metric we use called an incentive spirometer. It's to help keep the alveoli inflated. And so you inhale on this little piece of tubing. And, for someone my size, we'd really like to see, they'd be pretty happy with 1,500 milliliters. But when I woke up and right after I got extubated, I was pulling, 3,000 milliliters on the incentive spirometer. So I think that's a pretty objective measure of lung capacity and kind of where I was at, even with these really severe pulmonary contusions. I was 2 or 3 times as high on my IS as you would expect to see. So I think that probably did indicate that my baseline fitness helped me survive.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a life lesson in that, another life lesson from Adam. But this idea that, like, keeping ourselves in top physical condition, it not only, it's not just so that we can avoid injury, but it's also so that if something unexpected like this happens, like, the better shape we're in, the more resilient we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
really never know what you're training for. I guess I thought I was training for the Stikine, but the Stikine it was challenging for sure, but there was never a moment where I was felt like I was fighting for my life on the Stikine.
Yeah.
I was prepared for that, but it didn't happen. And then it did happen in the climbing gym of all places.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good transition. Like, do you feel a sense of irony that went and did this epic 60-mile class 5 rapid successfully, no injuries, and then you come back and where you get hurt is in a climbing gym?
Of course, there were many layers of irony in this whole thing. And, you know, from being the trauma nurse turned trauma patient to the class 5 kayaker who gets hurt in the gym, it was thick with irony.
Yeah. So again, you wrote, and we'll put a link. You wrote a really great article to kind of help other people, and in that article, you talked about 6. I think you called them mistakes that you made that came together to create this sort of perfect storm of what happened the day of the accident. And I just wondered if you could walk us through those and
Yeah,
sort of the lessons that people might take away from this.
sure. The first one is hubris. That's, you know, arrogance. But this, as a class 5 kayaker and having spent 30 years in austere river environments, I just really didn't think that the gym could hurt me. And that is just you know, it wasn't a conscious thought. It was more of a subconscious thought, but I think it was, you know, I'm the big bad class 5 kayaker and the gym cannot hurt me.
Okay. So ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second one was heuristics, and those are mental shortcuts. And we use heuristics in our daily life, and they can be helpful, but they can also be dangerous. And the heuristic that I was operating with was, and these two kind of tie in hand, but it was outside is dangerous, inside is safe. So like when I climbed outside, I would compulsively check knots, and, you know, I make checklists, and I was really taking it seriously and bringing a lot of respect to the outdoor environment. And I should have done that with the indoor environment, because, you know, 50 feet is 50 feet, whether there's a roof over your head or not. Let's see, what was the next one I'm doing off the top of my head here?
Oh, you're doing great. So I have inattention as the next one.
Yeah, that one, I was studying for a paramedic recertification exam in between my climbing routes, and I've always been good about leaving my phone in my locker. And that's a pretty obvious distraction that, you know, you would want to avoid when climbing. But I was, in between each route, I would study a couple test questions, and I think it probably just led to my head not being quite in the right place. Mm-hmm. The next one I think is a deviation from a routine. This is probably the crux or kind of single most relevant mistake, but I would typically always climb a route, descend, unclip, and then walk away and take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then reapproach the wall, clip in, and climb. And I know from surveillance video, a closed circuit video at the gym, that when I fell, I clipped in, climbed up, descended, unclipped, and it was going to be my last climb of the day. So instead of unclipping and walking away and taking a break, I just unclipped and stayed right at the base of the wall, and then immediately started climbing. I'm 6'4", so the little fabric gate that covers the bottom couple holds is not even in my line of sight if I'm standing right next to it.
Yeah. And
so by deviating from my normal routine, I kind of circumvented the visual cues that normally say you're not clipped in. I think that was probably the single biggest one.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, just kind of like varying from sort of, if you have a system or a habit or whatever,
Yeah.
and then you vary from it, like you kind of have to be careful. Yeah. I can understand that.
And then redundancy was another one. That's just a pitfall of the auto belay. There is no inherent redundancy in that system in terms of double check. So, you know, when you're belaying a partner, you're always double checking each other's figure of 8 and system. And that's just the deal with the auto belay, is that's not, you can install that redundancy by double checking yourself, but I did not do that.
Right.
And then focus or tunnel vision, that one, I couldn't believe that I had climbed all the way to the top of that thing without noticing that the rope wasn't retracting with me, that I'd actually walked, like was climbing right past this static line. And that for me was the hardest thing to get my head around. But I realized in hindsight that when you are climbing, particularly at a gym, because the holds are color coded, mm-hmm. If you're climbing at something that's kind of at the top of your ability level, which I was, say if I'm on a blue route, that is the only thing I see. It's the blue route.
Yep.
And those color coded holds really draw your attention. So everything else just kind of fades away. And which that's what you're trying to do, is be really focused, so it's kind of the flip side of the inattention, but it's almost like not seeing the forest for the trees.
I'll recap. So you said hubris, heuristics or mental shortcuts, inattention or distraction, deviation from a system, redundancy in the safety mechanisms and processes, and focus or focus meaning like being so focused on what you're doing that you're not focused on the systems around you.
To kind of summarize all those in a couple of words, it would be complacency. And like when I first started going to the gym, I was new to it and I was pretty paranoid about the auto belay. And so I would actually climb up like 2 holds every time I climbed. I would go up a couple holds and then jump off and make sure that my system was working. But you do that, a couple hundred times, and eventually you become kind of jaded to the risk. It starts to feel really safe. So,
yeah. Well, it's really interesting because as I was listening to episode 35 yesterday, again, a lot of what we talked about was flow state, but we also talked about sort of this mental, like risk management process that you have in the water of like these questions that you ask yourself. And I guess I was curious, like from the standpoint of like flow state is when you're kind of in the zone and you're so dialed in that you're not even thinking. And I guess I'm curious, like you were locked into your route that you were going up. Like, would you call that a flow state that you were in?
Yeah, I'm not really a good enough or experienced climber to achieve that, but yeah, I was certainly, the only thing I was seeing was that blue hold. So I wouldn't say that I wasn't having any thoughts probably, but yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah. And the difference maybe being like you just said, you're not that, you're as a climber, it's a different level than in the Whitewater. Like the Whitewater,
it takes years to kind of hone that and achieve that. I'm sure the expert climbers are, frequently in that kind of flow state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, these are great lessons. I mean, I think like once again, just like with our last episode, you're providing this stuff that's like, it's relevant, not just to what you experienced at a climbing gym. Like these are life lessons, these 6 lessons that you brought back. And I'm so grateful for you sharing them. Cause I think it's going to help a lot of people. So I appreciate that very much. So Adam, like the fall was almost 9 months ago. What's different now, and how's the recovery been going since, those initial couple of weeks?
Well, I far exceeded the expectation in terms of the recovery. There was no nursing home. I ended up 2 weeks in a hospital and then discharged to inpatient rehab. I went there for about 5 days and then I was discharged home. So about 3 weeks total. Kind of convalesced at home, like I said, in a basement. Couldn't get up the stairs, so we have a finished basement. Luckily, it's ground level. Stuck down there for I don't know another couple months, I guess, and just started doing the work of rehab while I was still in the hospital bed, and through a lot of trials and tribulations and hard work and support from physical therapy and occupational therapy, started to kind of get my strength back. Started out with just, like I said, getting out of the hospital bed into a recliner and then eventually standing up on one foot because I only had one weight bearing extremity. So I had both arms in a platform walker, which is like a walker with cradles for your arms at the top because I couldn't grip anything.
Yeah.
So like the first time I got out of bed, I lasted less than 5 seconds before I fell back to the bed. It was by far the most humbling moment of my life. And, I wasn't sure. It seemed like maybe I would be going to a nursing home. That was probably like, I don't know, that was early, I was still in a hospital. But, 5 seconds turned into 10 seconds, turned into a minute. And, when I got home in the basement, I was standing on one foot for a couple hours a day, eventually.
Yeah.
Started out with just kind of range of motion PT, like getting the joints mobile again and kind of trying to work the stiffness out, but I would do like arm circles and leg lifts in bed. And it was very, painstaking process, but eventually, I guess maybe like mid or early February, I was cleared for some light exercise. So I started going to the Y and working on the pool, doing like exercise bike and stationary bike and things like that. All just non-weight bearing stuff.
So, 2-3 months in, where was your head in terms of like the atom that exists for paddling?
I got in a kayak 2 months and a day after I fell, which was pretty, it was quite an experience just getting in. My friend had to come get me, load my boat. I couldn't do anything for myself. I was still on crutches, had a back brace on. And cool thing was I got in the boat and we really didn't know how it would go. Like he brought a tow tether with him to tow me back to shore if it didn't work out. It was just flat water, it was moving water, but no white water or anything. And I got in the boat and felt by far the best I had felt, since I had fallen. It like everything was kind of working. It wasn't perfect for sure. It was pretty painful, but I was able to paddle probably like, I don't know, half a mile or a mile just immediately. So it was really hope inspiring that, things were going to kind of work out.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 months and a day, you show up in crutches and a
Yeah.
back brace and you're in a kayak paddling. Like, did you ever think that you would be doing that after falling 45 feet from a climbing
No,
wall?
it was pretty unclear. There was certainly the thought that paddling might be over forever, but yeah, it's just, I don't know.
Not so.
Not the case. Yeah.
Not so. So I think you said 4 months after the accident, you entered a race. Was that right? Was it 4 months?
4 months to the day.
Yeah. Tell us about this race that you entered 4 months after your accident.
The race is on the Nolichucky River, and it's class 3 to easy class 4. I had been rehabbing on the Noli because it's easy access. You can drive right to the put-in spot and drive right to the takeout. So there was no walking involved. And the Whitewater is easy enough that I wasn't concerned about getting injured out there. So I kind of been going there once a week and rehabbing with some friends. And there was this race coming up that I've won a couple times in the past and typically done well in. And I kind of thought about doing it, but it didn't really seem like a great idea. And then right before the race, I realized it was going to be 4 months to the day since I'd fallen. I was like, well, I'll just do it. And if I get last place, who cares? Just be out there just to for the milestone of the 4 months. And then I got out there and I was just feeling really good and like won. It was pretty crazy. I was just charging hard for 9 miles in about an hour and somehow, won.
It's amazing. I mean, 4 months to the day after a 45-foot fall, you go out just thinking, I just want to finish and I'm okay with last place, and you win the race.
Yeah.
I mean, what did that like, seriously, finishing that race, like winning that race, what did that feel like?
Well, I was in tears, at the takeout. I was bawling like a baby. It was really emotional. It felt like kind of the end of a chapter. It felt like I was going to really come back. It was cool. I had a bunch of good friends that have been helping me through the whole process of rehab and logistics at the home front and everything for the last several months we're there. And so it was pretty special.
I mean, and there's been so much since that, but I just feel like from the Stikine to this epic high of the Stikine to this fall, and then 4 months later to win a race, like, I mean, that is resilience.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to add too, none of that happened in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. It was not all me. There was, like I said, I had just incredible support from my family, my wife. I think the whole experience was, harder for her than it was for me in a lot of ways because she's trying to work full time, take care of 2 kids, now take care of me. I usually do all of our transportation for the family and kind of take care of stuff on the home front. And the burden of all that went to her. So between her and, my many care providers and friends in the community, that race wouldn't have happened. And I would I'd probably still be laid up if it wasn't for all the help we had.
Well, and so that's a good point. I mean, we never do anything alone, right? And again, just coming back to the fact that you are a paramedic and a trauma nurse, what was it like for you to receive help? Like, no, I mean, you've been helping people your whole life. Like, what was it like to receive help?
Well, initially there was no choice. I couldn't even get a water bottle to my lips. So I had,
Yeah.
with the 4 broken extremities, there was no other option. So it wasn't really that big a deal. And then the only time or I guess the main time I struggled with it was when my wife wanted to get some help around the house and hire somebody to come kind of sit with me. And I was a jackass and refused to do that. I felt like I was kind of at a point where I didn't really need the help, but I wasn't seeing that it was more, for her. So the whole experience, the, kind of biggest regret was just, not allowing help for her to.
It's hard. It's a hard thing for all of us to do.
Yeah.
What's as you continue to recover and get stronger, what's next for you?
Well, bedside nursing is going to be difficult to impossible. Of all my injuries, the kind of most long-term significant injury is the ankle. The right ankle was completely obliterated. It's called a pilon fracture, and it's just a really nasty fracture with long-term sequelae. So not sure about nursing. I'm still working for the hospital, doing some office stuff, and they've been super generous about keeping me busy. And I'm still teaching. I teach paramedic students at the hospital, so I'm still doing that. That also involves quite a bit of walking. So I'm still using crutches. It looks like I had an orthopedic appointment yesterday. That was kind of my sign-off ortho appointment. And it seems that the ankle has probably done all the healing it's going to do, and I'm not going to get any more range of motion or better pain management out of it. So being referred to a specialist, which would involve, they would probably suggest either some kind of fusion or ankle replacement. I'm not super interested in more surgeries. So I don't know. We'll see. But when I got back from Stikine, I had already been talking to a friend who owns a kayaking school at the Nolichucky in Irwin, Tennessee. The school's called Nolichucky Outdoor Learning Institute. And Scott's a really good friend of mine. He was really instrumental in my recovery. But prior to me falling, we had been talking about me coming to do some kayak instruction because I wanted to give back to the kayaking community. I feel like I've gotten a lot out of it.
Absolutely.
It seemed like teaching would be a cool way to do that. I'm 44, and so I kind of realized like the Stikine is probably going to be the apex. Probably I'm not going to do anything harder than that, even barring any injury. So that was the plan, was to start doing some kayak teaching in 2023, kind of part-time. And then when I fell, it just looked like that was going to be impossible. So we kind of put it on the back burner. But then I had this, semi-miraculous healing trajectory. And so I was able to take the kayak instructor's course in May, and I've been teaching kayaking all summer. And the plan is to continue to do that. So I'm teaching, I'll teach any level of paddler from beginner and never having been in a kayak on up, but I'm really trying to focus on kind of intermediate to expert paddlers in terms of like people who want to, maybe elevate their game a little bit, doing some race coaching this fall. And I hope to get a personal trainer certificate of some sort this winter, some sort of credential for that, and do kind of focus more on coaching.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great story. I mean, it's a lifetime story. Like, again, episode 35, you exist to paddle. And so you've lived this like epic life and done all of these like really intense rivers and whitewater. And now you get to pass it on and share it with other people. I mean, I think that's how it should be. I think that's pretty awesome. And I'll just ask you now, if people want to get some instruction from Adam Herzog, what's the best way for them to do that?
We have a website. I'm on there. You can just send Scott. If people are, we've got scheduled group lessons and then as well as private instruction. So if people are interested in private instruction, there's you can just message Scott and he'll set it up. We'll figure out a date. And I've also got group lessons scheduled throughout the fall as well. MollyLearn.org. Yeah.
MollyLearn.org. Okay, cool. Yeah. We'll make sure that's on the show notes.
Yep. We'd love to see you.
Awesome. Adam, you shared those 6 mistakes that you made and shared them in such a way that people can learn from it. Super helpful for anybody that goes to a climbing gym, but again, just life lessons. I'm curious, like what other advice or lessons would you hope that people would take from this episode today?
I guess, the big thing was just that in life, there's really nothing more important than your kids. It really made that very apparent. I've done a lot of things for myself, and it sometimes seems like it may be a little selfish to be out there with kids or be out there alone, doing dangerous things when you have kids. And it may be a little selfish. That was probably the biggest single lesson. That and that, there is no safe. I think that idea of like the climbing gym is safe, or, I'll hear people say things like paddling class 4 is safe, or, mountain biking's safer than road biking, or what. There just is no safe. Every time you leave your house, you're exposing yourself to some form of risk. And I think it's fine to take big risk as long as you got eyes wide open. And, this idea of being able to completely mitigate risk, and just because you're good at something means that you can do it safely. It's just it's kind of a false narrative to me now. It's cognitive dissonance, basically. So I think risk is fine to assume, but know that you're assuming it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just to kind of extend on that, you've got kids. And so as a dad, what are the lessons that you want to instill in your kids with regard specifically to risk taking?
I think it's just that. It's just, know what's at stake, and don't fool yourself into thinking. I think particularly in whitewater kayaking, there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on, and I've been guilty of it for years. And it's kind of a coping mechanism. Like, well, this person died or got hurt because they made this and that mistake, and I won't do that because I'm so much better. Well, 100% vigilance is impossible to maintain. And so, I think it's, as I said, it's fine to take risk, but understand that, you're not perfect and you're human and you're going to make mistakes. If you make the wrong mistake at the wrong time, then, bad things are going to happen. But there's also risk in playing video games and sitting on the couch, and, there's risk to everything. And I think sometimes, maybe the risk is a little more black and white or a little more apparent if you're doing some, our kids, we have fostered in them a lifestyle of extreme sports. So we're skiing, we're biking, we're kayaking, we're rafting, we're doing football. I think that's okay. I would much rather foster that than foster a sedentary lifestyle. But I do worry about my kids too. You got kids starting high school. It's like, I know for me as a teenager growing up, the kayak, probably I was a pretty rowdy, wild young man. And I think the kayak probably tempered some of that to some degree. So there's certainly risk to, going to a party where there's drinking involved and then getting in a car and whatever. I see that all the time in my job. So those are complicated issues, and I don't think there's a completely straightforward answer to them.
Yeah, it's great wisdom from somebody who has experienced a lot in the risk-taking world. So, Adam, when we spoke in episode 35, I asked you the question that I ask everybody, and that is, when Hollywood makes a movie about you, who's going to play you? You said Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to stick with that. I just used to, all the time people used to tell me I looked just like him, especially when I was wearing scrubs in the hospital from the ER show ER.
I love it. So when they make the sequel, Anthony Edwards is going to stick around. So the first movie was called Whiteout. What's the sequel going to be called?
It's going to be called Dream and a Nightmare.
A Dream and a Nightmare. Wow, that's great. Starring Anthony Edwards. I love it. Well, I appreciate it so much. We have got, we'll make sure to share the the kayaking school show notes. If people want to get in touch with you, is that the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, and I've also got a Facebook and Instagram account as well. I sent you the links for those, so you can send me a message through either of those apps. But I have good availability this fall. If anyone's looking for kayak lessons, hit me up.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your humility and you sharing the wisdom of this experience. I know it's been devastating for you, but man, you are a resilient person.
Well, thank you.
It's incredibly inspiring. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Adam's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening, Adam. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.